Welcome to the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies. Today is November 12th, 2024, and tonight we'll be having a class on social movements in India. Tonight we will be drawing largely from India Today by Rajani Palme Dutt, who we have done a previous class on fascism and social revolution. So I'm looking forward to this class. The People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies is a Party of Communist USA sponsored school, so that does allow us a wide variety of topics and discussion. So today we will be reading from R. Palme Dutt's India Today and the independence movement in India. We will also discuss origins of the Hindutva movement, as well as current political movements in modern India. And so our first section will be on India Today and India's independence movements. And the reader, you have the floor.
Okay, preface. The topic of nationalism in India and the Indian independence movement, like all movements, is multifaceted. Within these movements, there are both reactionary and progressive elements. It is important to think dialectically about the historical facts presented. Gandhi, who is seen as controversial today, was nevertheless an especially important figure. He advocated for nonviolent protest and civil disobedience. His secularism was a unifying force in the independence movement. He was assassinated by right-wing nationalists who believed he was too conciliatory with the Muslim population in India. The independence movement grew especially during World War II, when Britain played a crucial role in the European front against Nazi Germany. Some Indian revolutionary figures turned to Nazi Germany and fascist Italy for support. The Soviet Union's support for Indian sovereignty played a crucial role in pushing the movement in a socialist direction, leading to their direct support for the Communist Party of India, formed in 1925. R. Palme Dutt. Rajani Palme Dutt was born in 1896. He and his brother Clemens were founding members of the Communist Party of Great Britain in 1920. R. Palme Dutt was an influential communist who was the fourth General Secretary of the CPGB, which is the Communist Party of Great Britain. He never abandoned Stalin and the Soviet Union. He was supportive of Stalin and questioned Nikita Khrushchev's secret speech. He had a portrait of Stalin in his office and said that it will only come down when he dies. India Today, Indian nationalism. Is there a people of India? At the outset, we are faced with a subtle question, which is still frequently raised by the apologists of imperialism, though it used to be more fashionable a generation ago than it is today, when the force of facts and events has largely destroyed its basis. Is there a people of India? Can the diversified assembly of races, religions, within the barriers and divisions of caste, of language, and of other differences, and with the widely varying range of social and cultural levels inhabiting the vast subcontinental expanse of India, be considered a nation or ever become a nation? Is this not a false transposition of Western conceptions to entirely different conditions? Is not the only unity in India the unity imposed by British rule? The answer of the older school of imperialists, before the advancing strength of the nationalist movement had sicklied aware their naive self-confidence with doubt, used to be a very downright, "There is not and never was in India," was the firm declaration of Sir John Strachey in 1888, in the spirit of the farmer at the zoo stoutly confronting the giraffes. The political unity of India, although never attained perfectly in fact, always was the ideal of people throughout the centuries. The conception of the universal sovereign as the Chakravartin Raja runs through the Sanskrit literature and is emphasized in scores of inscriptions. The story of the gathering of the nations to the battle of Kurukshetra, as told in the Mahabharata, implies the belief that all the Indian peoples, including those of the extreme south, were united by real bonds and concerned in interests common to all. European writers, as a rule, have been more conscious of the diversity than of the unity of India. Joseph Cunningham, an author of an unusually independent spirit, is an exception when describing the Sikh fears of a British aggression in 1845. He recorded the acute and true observation that Hindustan, moreover, from Kabul to the Valley of Assam and the island of Ceylon, is regarded as one country, and the dominion in it associated in the minds of the people with the predominance of one monarch or one race. India therefore possesses and always has possessed for considerably more than 2,000 years ideal political unity. Trade union movements. 1928 reports from the British Trade Union Congress delegation to India detail the terrible working conditions endured by Indian workers. Most barely receive enough wages to survive, and conditions in the workers' quarters were cramped, filthy, and lacked ventilation. In the first 6 months of 1920, there were 200 strikes involving 1 million workers. These were the conditions in which Indian trade unionism was born. Most of the Indian trade unions in the main industries and centers derived from this period, although from the inevitable conditions, organization has seldom been continuous. This great period of militancy was the birth of the modern Indian labor movement. Trade union organization shot up. According to the government's figures, trade union membership in Bombay, which in the 3 years 1923 to 26 had only advanced from 48,669 to 59,554, reached 75,602 by 1927, leapt forward to 95,321 by March 1928, and to 200,325 by March 1929. Foremost in this advance was the famous Gurney Kamgar Red Flag Union of the Bombay Mill Workers, which started during the year with a membership of only 324, and according to the government's Labor Gazette returns, had reached 54,000 by December 1928 and 65,000 by the first quarter of 1929. Meanwhile, the older Bombay Textile Labor Union, founded in 1926, which stagnated under the reformist leadership of N.M. Joshi, Secretary of the Trade Union Congress, and which had the official encouragement of the government and the employers, moved according to the same official returns from 8,436 in October 1928 to 6,749 in December 1928. The choice of the workers was evident. The strength of the Gurney Kamgar Union lay in its system of mill committees close to the workers. The strike movement during 1928 totaled 31.5 million working days, or more than the previous 5 years together. Although the Bombay textile workers were the center, the movement was spread over India. Of the 203 disputes, 111 were in Bombay, 60 were in Bengal, 8 in Bihar and Orissa, and 7 in Madras, and 2 in the Punjab. 110 were in the cotton and wool textile industry, 19 in jute, 11 in the engineering workshops, and 9 on the railways and in the railway workshops, and 1 in coal mining. Towering over all the rest was the Bombay textile strike, the greatest strike in Indian history, in which the entire labor force of 150,000 workers stood united for 6 months from April to October against every form of pressure and government violence. The strike was originally directed against measures of rationalization and 7.5% wage cut, and was extended as is developed to a wide series of demands. The reformist leadership originally opposed the strike, N.M. Joshi describing their position as that of lookers on, but were drawn into the movement. After every attempt to break the strike had failed, the government appointed the Fawcett Committee, which recommended the withdrawal of the 7.5% wage cut and conceded certain other demands of the workers. The Meerut Trial. In March 1929, the government's main blow fell. The principal active leaders of the working class movement were arrested from all over India and brought to a small inland town of Meerut, far from any industrial center, for trial. One of the longest and most elaborate state trials in history opened. 31 leaders were originally arrested, and 1 more was subsequently added. Their names may be recorded for whatever their varying subsequent roles or activities. They stand as pioneers of the Indian working class movement, and many of them are still today among the best leading forces of the Indian working class. The modern period, the first years after the Meerut arrest, were a difficult period for the Indian labor movement. The strike movement in these years, entering into the economic crisis, met with heavy defeat. The Meerut trial, although as in every such case sowing the deep seeds for the future strength and victory of the movement, dealt a heavy immediate blow to the labor movement. The Indian working class at such an early stage of development could not easily at once replace this leadership which had been removed. Therefore, in the critical years of national struggle which followed, the political role of the working class was weakened, as had been the intention of imperialism. Background on the independence movement. The Indian National Congress, INC, was established in 1885 as a controlled opposition by the British government. Although there were members who advocated for sovereignty from the British, the overwhelming majority were in favor of a self-governing India as a part of the British Empire. Gandhi became the leader of the National Congress by the 1920s, advocating for nonviolent protest and civil disobedience. While his tactics weren't perfect, they were more effective and popular with the masses than the INC's tactic of appeasing to the British. During this time, the Communist Party of India was also involved in the independence movement. They initially opposed the National Congress and the Social Democratic wing of the Congress. However, the change of policy of the Comintern toward Popular Front politics led CPI to change their relation to the Indian National Congress. The Communists joined the Congress Socialist Party, which worked as the left wing of Congress. Through joining CSP, the CPI accepted the CSP demand for a constituent assembly, which it had denounced 2 years before. The CPI, however, analyzed that the demand for a constituent assembly would not be
a substitute for Soviets.
Thank you, comrade. Collaboration with the Axis powers. In contrast to the National Congress, there were also right-wing figures in the revolutionary movement, most notably Subhas Chandra Bose, a more radical member of the National Congress, took a different approach. Though he was elected president of the Indian National Congress twice, his uncompromising views diverged from Gandhi's and placed him at arms with the party. Although he dreamt of an industrial socialist India, his frustration led him to seek alliances with Axis powers in an attempt to liberate India through more radical and violent means. He went to Germany believing that Britain would lose the war and that an alliance with the Axis powers would give India a seat opposite Britain at the post-war negotiating table. He met with Mussolini and many senior German officials, including Himmler, Ribbentrop, and Hitler, as he pursued official recognition of India's independence. He also hoped to persuade soldiers of Britain's Indian Army captured in Germany and Italian prisoner of war camps to turn against Britain and liberate the subcontinent from without.
Thank you, comrade. We will now break for a discussion round. If you have a question or a comment, please use the raise hand function, and we will get to your comment in the order they went up. Also, please keep all questions and comments on topic. With that, Comrade Andrea, you have the floor.
Yes, as Comrade Dr. Angelo has always told us, we must be dialectical, so I want to make this short and sweet. Although for his time, Mahatma Gandhi was a force for good during the 1929, I feel it needs to be noted that we can't forget his stance on the Black population. You can Google this yourself. It's easy to search up, but Gandhi was a notoriously racist to Black people, and I have a few quotes here. According to the book, The South African Gandhi, Stretcher Bearer of the Empire, Gandhi described Black Africans as savage, raw, and living a life of indolence and nakedness. He campaigned relentlessly to prove to the British rulers that the Indian community in South Africa was superior to the native Black Africans. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Andrea. Comrade Angelo, you have the floor.
Yes. Yeah, I want to thank Comrade Andrea for that. I didn't know that. I learned a lot from this class so far. It's not surprising, but I didn't know there was a group that supported the fascists in India for their independence. The same thing happened in Ireland. They supported the fascists against Britain in Ireland. So it's understandable. But I didn't know that this happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
They mentioned the Bombay textile strike. They didn't mention the year. I looked it up, and there was another textile strike in Bombay in like 1983. I'm assuming that's a different one than the one he was talking about. Which textile strike was he talking about?
I'm actually not sure if it's the same strike that you're reading up on.
Yeah, I
I
assume
would
this
have.
was the public spring of the 1930s, so it shouldn't have been like talking about one more than 30 years later. So we must have been talking about an earlier one.
Yeah, I believe this is talking about the period of the 1920s. So yeah, it's probably a different one.
Okay.
I think it was brought up about Muhammad Gandhi's explicit racism towards Black people, and I think that was definitely important, to note. But I think we know India's history of control by the British, and their way of what the British do, or as any ruling, you could say, entity ever does, is kind of pit people against each other to continue control. And I know this is true. Actually, at my congregation, there are some Jewish Indians, and the history is quite interesting that before even the British got there, they were treated quite well. There wasn't much anti-Semitism towards them. Once the British got involved, it kind of anti-Semitism came into the mix, and we've heard the story before. But just keeping that in mind when we think of Muhammad Gandhi, these ideas
60 seconds.
kind of foreign to India before the British came in, and religion was a big factor of that too. Obviously, that's all.
I just wanted to add on to the point about Mahatma Gandhi, his views on Black people. So Gandhi actually lived in South America for some period of time, and he experienced discrimination there because of his Indian background. Ironically enough, he learned some of the methods of nonviolent protest and civil disobedience from observing the movements in South Africa. So it's an interesting kind of duality there. On one hand, he learned from what he saw over there. On the other hand, he still looked upon Black people as inferior.
Thank you, Comrade.
Yeah, so my first question, and apologies if this is a little bit out of the bounds of this class, but at the time of these events, did India have the same severity of rape problem that it does today? And then did you say that was South Africa or South America that Gandhi lived in?
South Africa.
I am not sure about your other question. Does anyone have any better idea? I'm not sure that data was discussed by R. Palme Dutt.
I mean, I can give a little bit of information and context on that. It really depends, but it's not as bad as it was back. Let me correct my words. It's much worse today. Because India is so diverse, there's a lot of places that have different views on gender and sex, and as a result, it really depends. Some places a harem was normal. Some places they still lived in rural tribes and ethnic tribes. So it really, really depends on those kinds of things. As a whole, I would have to say that it's probably gotten worse over the years, mostly because of imperialism. Do you mind if I just say my comment, because I have my hand raised?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, comrade. So this is different from the question here, but most of the socialist movements in India actually started as just anti-imperialist movements from Britain. They really just wanted to get away from Britain colonizing them. So it's not surprising that a lot of people, India is a huge place, but there's some folks that straight up went to Italy and Germany and just asked them for assistance from like the Nazis. Like that's unfortunately a normal thing at the time. It didn't really become socialist until, as time progressed, more leaders got involved in trade union movements and just slowly pushed it towards a more left-wing fashion. And then just on a smaller note, India and Africa, actually, most African states had an actual good relationship with each other until Britain came in and basically imperialism took over in India and had them colonized as part of Britain's colony. And then the racism came afterwards. So that's a huge tell as to where it came from in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that we seem to run into this in a lot of colonized countries where, seeking national liberation from imperial rule is like the priority of the population. And the communist parties, where they exist, form a part of that front. And I think it's connected to the way that Lenin was always separated patriotism from like bourgeois nationalism. So we can have socialist patriotism and we can focus on freeing a nation from, domination first before we necessarily transition to socialism. And it seems like that's a pretty common pathway for these colonized countries.
Yeah, I wanted to ask our comrades of Indian heritage, what would the views of, I guess two questions really, what are the views of the people in India on the British Commonwealth? And what would the views of the Indian communists be on the Commonwealth? And if it doesn't go too off topic, what would the position of our comrades of Indian heritage on this phone call? What did you think of Rishi Sunak?
I think that's a little bit off topic for what we're discussing right now.
Okay, that's fine.
I personally don't really know, to be honest.
If we have some time at the end of the class, maybe we can discuss that. Otherwise, I think we should just move on.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will return to the presentation. So our second section is going to be on the origins of the Hindutva movement. And I believe, comrade, this is your section, correct?
Yes.
You have the floor.
So Hinduism versus Hindutva. I wanted to start with this to preface like the differences between Hinduism and Hindutva. And it's useful to kind of think of it as the difference between Judaism and Zionism. So Hinduism is a philosophical, spiritual, and often religious practice among many people in India, especially in northern regions of India. It's one of the oldest religions in the world that is still widely practiced today, and there are hundreds of schools of thought, most of which are based on ancient texts such as the Vedas, Upanishads, Puranas, and the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana. In contrast, Hindutva is a right-wing nationalist philosophy and is not religious. Proponents of Hindutva think of Hindus as a racial group within India and advocate for Hindu supremacy. And I just want to point out on the right, there's like a diagram of all of these different schools of Hindu thought. And it's interesting because there are even materialist schools of thought. So we can move on. So origins of Hindutva, Chandranath Basu. Writer Chandranath Basu coined the term in his 1892 book, Hindutva. Basu was from the Bengal region of occupied India and was a staunch conservative Hindu. He portrayed Hindus as superior to people of other faiths and had very traditional views on women, seeing marriage as having the sole purpose of creating progeny and maintaining male hegemony. He was a strong proponent of the Indigenous Aryans theory, IAT, also known as the Out of India theory, which is the belief that Aryans are indigenous to the Indian subcontinent. Basu argued for the superiority of the Aryan race and that the Indian Hindus were true Aryans. This theory is upheld by a minority of Indian scholars today, yet plays a significant role in Hindutva politics. And another important figure was Veer Savarkar. Savarkar was a politician and activist who advocated for Indian independence from the British by revolutionary means. He was inspired by Basu's work and expanded on his ideology of Hindutva. He was a proponent of the two-nation theory, which called for separate homelands for Indian Muslims and Indian Hindus within a decolonized British India. This theory was popular with the Muslim separatist groups such as the All India Muslim League, who Savarkar collaborated with, which ultimately led to the partition of India in 1947. Savarkar made it very clear in his writings that religious Hinduism is not the same as Hindutva. He even held a disdain for the peaceful elements of the religion. And an excerpt from Veer Savarkar's Hindutva, it says, "Here it is enough to point out that Hindutva is not identical with what is vaguely indicated by the term Hinduism. By an ism, it is generally meant a theory or a code more or less based on spiritual or religious dogma or system. But when we attempt to investigate into the essential significance of Hindutva, we do not primarily, and certainly not mainly, concern ourselves with any particular theocratic or religious dogma or creed. Had not linguistic usage stood in our way, then Hinduness would have certainly been a better word than Hinduism as a near parallel to Hindutva. Hindutva embraces all the departments of thought and activity of the whole being of our Hindu race." And there are some influences from fascism to this ideology, especially from B.S. Munjay. So he was the leader of the Hindu Mahasabha party and a mentor to Savarkar. He visited fascist Italy and met with Mussolini, receiving guided tours of military schools and educational institutions, including the Italian fascist youth organization, the Opera Nazionale Balilla. He drew inspiration from these youth camps in molding the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or the RSS, a Hindu nationalist paramilitary group, along fascist lines. The deep impression left on Munjay by the vision of the fascist organization is confirmed by his diary. The idea of fascism vividly brings out the conception of unity amongst people. India, and particularly Hindu India, needs some such institution for the military regeneration of the Hindus, so that the artificial distinctions so much emphasized by the British and martial and non-martial classes among the Hindus may disappear. Our institution of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh of Nagpur under Dr. Hedgewar is of this kind, though quite independently conceived. I will spend the rest of my life in developing and extending this institution of Dr. Hedgewar all throughout the Maharashtra and other provinces. And in relation to the caste system, so Indian society has been divided into the caste system for centuries. Despite movements against the system, the class hierarchy remnant of feudal India remains to this day. And Hindu nationalists see this hierarchy as a scale of Aryan blood. So people at the top of the hierarchy are seen as being more Aryan. And it's notable that the RSS is predominantly composed of upper-class Hindus, especially Brahmins and Kshatriyas. And in another excerpt from Veer Savarkar's text, all that the caste system has done is to regulate its noble blood on lines believed and on the whole rightly believed by our saintly and patriotic lawgivers and kings to contribute most to fertilize and enrich all that was barren and poor, without famishing and debasing all that was flourishing and nobly endowed. And you can see the structure of the caste system on the right here. So the Brahmins or the priests were at the very top, and right under them were like kings, rulers, and warriors. And then under them were the Vaisyas, the merchants, craftsmen, landowners, and skilled workers. And then under them were the Sudra, the farm workers, unskilled workers, and servants. And even below that caste is what most people know think of when they think of the caste system, the Dalits, the untouchables. So they're people who had like very undesirable jobs in Indian society, like sweeping the street, removing human or animal waste, handling dead bodies. They were basically treated as outcasts.
Thank you, comrade.
So I guess a comment and then a question. The comment is, well, I remember when I was in Mumbai and we were being taxied somewhere. And I remember looking out, there was like some club and, like it was almost like you were in like a Bollywood movie, but like this beautiful lady walks out. Of course, she has like this very white skin, but it really does seem like there's a colorization in Indian, you could say like the caste system had a effect with that. Like they said, the Aryan blood. I know that India wasn't, that kind of idea of having Aryan blood wasn't just exclusive to India, but Iran as well. And I believe that's where the name Iran comes from. But it was kind of interesting to hear all that. And that Hindutva movement, if I'm saying that right, pretty sure that's Modi's party has some influence in that. I'm sure we'll see that. But on that, I noticed on that first slide, it broke down Hinduism, and I thought I saw Buddhism on there. And I know that that Buddhism is tied to Hindu.
60 seconds.
But how does Hindutva look at Buddhism as like a religion? It's just really interesting, these ideas of right-wingers and their intersectionalism. You see it with the Zionists, you see it with the Hindutva. This is a fascinating class, but if you could answer that question, that's all. Thanks, comrade.
Yeah, I'm not sure like how proponents of the Hindutva movement would look upon Buddhists. But basically, remember that it's not about the religion. It's more about categorizing people as like a race. And so, it's pretty complicated, and honestly, there's a lot of mental gymnastics you have to do to try to understand what their conception of Hindutva is. If you want to look through the Hindutva books written by Munjay and Savarkar, you can, but to be honest, they really just think of like Hindutva as like the Hindu people.
60 seconds.
And yes, there is like a proximity to whiteness there. Savarkar in the book does write like he was very racist towards black people, and they did view people with darker skin. So for instance, people from southern India, they saw them as like adjacent to like tribal peoples. Like they saw them as lesser than and less Aryan than like northern Indians or those who had, I guess, a more proximity to Aryanness.
Thank you, comrade. Just from your comment, I'm reminded of one line from Tazenday's Chocolate Rain. It was, "Chocolate rain cleans the sewers out beneath Mumbai."
Yeah, I can confirm what Carmen said about the discrimination against the South Indians. I have a South Indian friend. He lives here in Salt Lake City. But there's a lot of animosity between the North and the South Indians. I mean, he really despises the North Indians, just takes every opportunity to dislike them. Unfortunately, he's kind of believes a lot of the Hindu kind of this propaganda that they've spread. But yeah, but still, he really doesn't like North Indians. They've treated him bad. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. If there's no more questions, we'll go on to our next section. So our next section is going to be on political movements in modern India. And for the speaker, you have the floor for this section.
Political movements in modern India. The Rasha Swamasavik Sangh, this is RSS, and one of the foundations created in September 27th, 1925. And the motivation on most of these is the struggles they had with British colonialism, as you see, from 1880 to 1920. And some of the founders of this organization really took some lessons on why they were defeated in their struggles with British colonialism. So the organization itself is described as an Indian right-wing Hindu nationalist volunteer paramilitary group. One of the things proponents, the founder, as you see, Hedgewar, which Comrade mentioned earlier, he was inspired by the European fascism and wanted to create a program to instill Hindu discipline. And I found this organization interesting in that it has a paramilitary wing. Now you see that saffron flag, that is what they take as their logo. And it's basically, if you see the saffron flag of Shivaji, the Bhagwadwaj was used as an emblem for the RSS. So they took this emblem for themselves. Their interpretation is that the saffron flag is believed to be a guru or supreme authority, according to the RSS. So that is what why they chose the saffron flag. Okay, next slide. Okay, the Bharatiya Janata Party. Now this is an actual party, BJP. Now BJP was formed to be the political party for the RSS and is still active today. So it was founded in 1951. Now their history was troubled. They had a troublesome past with the Indian governments and were banned by the Indian government at several occasions during the decades. Now, in 2014, they gained an overwhelming majority and are right now the 21st century's largest far-right group by membership. And the lotus is their logo for their party. All right? Now, interestingly, the current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, has been a lifelong member of both RSS and BJP. He was members of them, and during both their tumultuous years, was a part of both organizations. But even saying that, as is evident, his failure to pass his disastrous farmers' policies, and this was in the, I think of 2021, and I think 2023, there are two huge national farmer strikes. His policies led to national strikes, forcing him to abandon his program. And I say for now, I'm sure he's just waiting for another chance. The successful national mobilization of some of India's communist parties to organize these protests with millions of farmers and workers participating helped defeat the proposed laws. Now, this is fairly current history. And even though I think they said that the RSS is has 37%, it's a fairly good majority because they have many parties. Most of them, of course, are made up of Brahmins, and they were still unable, with all of their power, to produce these laws that would benefit capitalists coming in and taking over. And we had the honor, I'll stop, that's in another slide. We had the honor of talking to Sankar Ghosh a few years ago. And all we said to them is, America is looking on at their efforts, and that even though they won these fights, they knew that there were going to be more fights in the future. All right, so here's two of our communist parties in India. You've got the Social Unity Center of India, and it's SUCI, and then they changed it to SUCI and then another parentheses C, because they wanted to say Socialist Unity Center of India Communists, okay? And and then there is AIKKMS, All India Krishak Mazdoor Sangathan.
So
it could be
Mazdoor means workers of the Khet means fields or farms. So workers of the farm workers.
Got it. Yeah, and sometimes it's KHET space Mazdoor, so it depends on how they're pronouncing it. All right. So they were founded in April of 1948 by Indian communists who considered the Communist Party of India, and this is CPI, and that was in the 1920s when that was founded, to be insufficiently Marxist-Leninist and revolutionary. Its inspiration was Shibdas Ghosh, and he was chosen to be the Center's or Susi's first general secretary. Now, at the second Congress in 2009, they did change their names to Susi. So that's what they show up now. Now, interestingly, the All India AIKKMS is a weapon in the hands, and these are quotes, in the hands of the toiling peasants of India to fight against the onslaught of capital at home and abroad. Long back in 1950, being guided by a great Marxist philosopher at the time, Comrade Shibdas Ghosh. So you'll notice both Susi and the IAKKMS really were influenced by Shibdas Ghosh. All right, AIKKMS has been waging relentless and uncompromising fights against their exploitation by the present ruling capitalist order, and that is Modi's government. Guided by Ghosh's teachings, we have organized hundreds of movements to safeguard the interests of the toiling millions of our country. And we know for a fact, with our history with AIKMS, that they are really a show of strength in India. Now, some ideology in the communist parties in India. Okay, so here is what do you call it? Shankar Ghosh is in the middle there. AIKKMS is working throughout the country in more than 15 states. Obviously, you've heard some of the states that were mentioned, with Bombay and some others. At present, renowned mass leaders, Comrade Satyavan and Comrade Shankar Ghosh, are the president and general secretaries, respectively. PCUSA had the honor of participating with General Secretary Shankar Ghosh on 2 seminars hosted by our Agricultural and Rural Commission. And he's a great guy. AIKKMS considers the problems of the peasants and agricultural laborers in the country are due to the capitalist system prevailing in society. Governments both at the center and in the different states, since independence to this day, are working for the benefits of the capitalist class. And they're talking about Modi and RSS and BJP. Therefore, they have not inclined to take up anything that would ameliorate the strains and pathos of the peasants and agricultural laborers. Peasants are exposed to ruthless exploitation and fraud perpetrated on them. And the picture to the left is the AIKKMS Extended Council meeting in June of this year, and that's Comrade Shankar Ghosh, and he was discussing State and Revolution by Comrade Lenin, and there were hundreds of participants attended. Okay, next slide. Okay, Susi holds that India is a capitalist country with monopoly capitalism and with imperialist trends. In line with that analysis, the party works towards a socialist revolution rather than a people's democratic revolution, like the Communist Party of India, in parentheses Marxist, or CPIM, a national democratic revolution, again, the Communist Party of India, or a new democratic revolution like the Naxalites. I didn't get any info on the Naxalites. So again, Shibdas Ghosh, his quote, "We built up our party, the Socialist Unity Center of India, as a genuine Marxist-Leninist party of the Indian proletariat. There can be one, and only one, Marxist-Leninist party, i.e. a genuine revolutionary working class party in a country." And I think that is a very important quote. There can only be one. Okay. As a Marxist, and these are again quotes from, what do you call it, my sources as well as Shibdas Ghosh. As Marxists, we know that a political party in a class-divided society is nothing but an organization of one class or another. To a Marxist, a political party means a class party that grows and develops on a definite class mythological approach to problems, to influence and guide not only the fundamental process of analysis, but also its cultural, ethical life and standards of the leaders and the rank and file in all fields of activities. This came from a speech that I got out of Marx's Internet Archive. All right, go ahead. All right, now here's the CPI. You heard it mentioned. And I have been informed that there was a CPI and that it split. That is not the information that I received. So maybe there's two organizations there now. Someone can, on the discussion, to tell what that's all about. But I'm talking about here the Communist Party of India, CPI, is the oldest communist party in India. CPI was founded in modern-day Kanpur in December 1920 or 1925. There's a dispute as to when it was founded, so I just put them both in. The CPI did not adopt a party constitution, which was a foremost prerequisite required to be considered for the membership of the Communist International. Currently, the CPI, hyphens or parentheses M, has 27 governmental representatives across 4 states in India. They were heavily involved in the beginning in the resistance to British colonization and the fight against the caste system, and they were for land reform. So this is what their basis was in the beginning. Okay, between 21 and 1933, many communist leaders were arrested and imprisoned. In 1934, the British colonial administration banned the Communist Party and its affiliated trade union and peasant organizations, making membership a criminal offense. The Communist Party of India continued its activities clandestinely, despite the repression. Between 1946 and 1951, it structured the peasant revolt in Telangana and organized guerrilla warfare against the feudal lords. The CPI was the main opposition party in India during the 50s and the 60s, and was part of the ruling United Front government from 1996 to 1998. Due to repeated poor performances in elections, in 2023, the Election Commission of India withdrew CPI's national party status.
Thank you, comrade. And with that, we'll stop for our last discussion round. So once again, if you have a question or comment, please use the raise hand function.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the CPI, Communist Party of India, is not the same as the Communist Party of India Marxist. CPIM was formed from a split from the CPI. They're kind of like the CPI and CPIM are kind of like analogous to the PCUSA and CPUSA's relationship.
Thank you, comrade. General Secretary Joe, did you want to respond to something as well?
Yeah, mentioned the one point about CPI and CPIM are 2 different parties. I also wanted to mention, in case it wasn't clear, I think it's a little ambiguous in the slides, the AIKKMS is a mass organization of the SUCI. So it's not a communist party in and of itself. It's a mass organization for peasants and farmers and agricultural workers of the SUCI. That's it.
Thank you, comrade Joe.
Yeah, I noticed that comrade mentioned the Naxalites. So that's basically a communist, like a Maoist group in India, and the Naxalites were basically like terrorists. They would organize like violent revolts, and they brought really a terrible reputation to communists in India. They're really looked down upon by other communists, as well as CPI, not CPIM, but the main CPI party. It still exists today, and there are regions of India where they are part of like a left front government. So, for instance, in states, most notably Kerala, Kerala is led by the Communist Party in a coalition government. So, and it's very interesting because there are a lot of southern Indian states that are more communist leaning, and they were democratically elected. So it's one of the few examples where a Communist Party was democratically elected to be the leaders of a specific section of a country.
Thank you, comrade.
Yeah, my question was at least partially answered with one of those slides talking about the imperialist nature of India, which I'm sure could be elaborated on. But India is the eye in BRICS, at least if I'm not mistaken. So is that, and we could go on about BRICS, I'm sure. How does that work in, I guess, a short answer so we don't get too off topic? Because I believe we do consider BRICS itself to be somewhat anti-imperialist. So I guess just there's a little bit of dialectics and contradictions there, might be the short answer to it. But if anybody wants to talk on it, I'd appreciate it.
I see some hands went up at that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the claim that India's imperialist. Maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, it is a situation to be looking at dialectically. Kind of similar to how like we see Russia with Putin. They're part of BRICS as well. But Putin's government is not it's not a communist government. It's more of like it's like a bourgeois uh government. So, while Modi himself does have connections to like the RSS and right-wing figures in terms of world politics, it is better for the various countries of the world to pull away from US imperialism.
Thank you, comrade. General Secretary Joe, did you want to respond as well?
Yeah, comrade said it very well. I imagine the analysis which said that India is imperialist is something we would probably consider ultra left. It's not something we'd really agree with. It's similar to how it's common in the ultra left to call Russia imperialist now, which we don't agree with either. There's a world of difference between Western imperialism with the United States and Russia and India, for example. That's it.
Thank you, comrade Joe.
Would you consider India to be like the nation with the most like revolutionary potential? Like if there was if there was like a revolutionary situation, would that place be like most likely out of all the world to become socialist, would you say?
I wouldn't really be too sure about that because while there are a variety of communist parties in India, there's no like united communist movement there. They're all like kind of split. They're all kind of going in different directions. So I personally don't know like how well like a people's revolution would go at this point in time. I think the main focus should be combating the influence of the RSS and the BJP because those fascist influences are getting more and more strong in the country. And I think that should be really the primary goal for the communist parties there and to unite first before anything like that would even happen.
Thank you, comrade. Comrade, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, like I also looked up like Gandhi. Like to be fair to Gandhi, he later changed his views on Africans and blacks, and he started saying like they both blacks and Indians should be free. And later, like Nelson Mandela, like said that he claimed him as like an inspiration or anything, and like and so he later said later in life said his views on most of all of his racist views. And I thought said that Brick was anti-imperialist, and he was wondering how that to do with like India, since because it has the right-wing government in it. Thanks.
A couple of things. One, I think we have to consider India is capitalist. I don't think it's imperialist. And that may be why, there is no uniting right now, just like anything else. But the other thing in my research, I found it came along with the fact that it appears that Gandhi's assassin was a member of the RSS, which I think is interesting. They did not like the peaceful method. Remember, RSS is a paramilitary organization also. So that was just a factoid I wanted to pass on.
The leftist coalition that is led by the communist parties, and I remember hearing about them in the news during COVID, as if they were the first state that actually got their populations to get the vaccines, and that was just due to their leftist their leftist policies that allowed them that access. And I found out that it is the kind of similar to American politics, where the incumbent has a harder time getting reelected. It was actually that coalition that did get reelected in 2021, which is very rare in, I guess, Indian politics for the incumbent to get reelected. So it shows the success, and it's a huge coalition. I think like over 6 million people in it. So I think there was a comrade asking about the revolutionary fervor of that of India. There is something there. I would like to know more about it, like how revisionists and ultra leftists they have to deal with within that coalition. But it's definitely pretty promising. Definitely better than we have here. So also clear that region has the best beaches in India, so it's a good place to go. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to also point out, I mentioned earlier, like kind of the similarities to Hindutva as like almost like Zionism is to like Judaism. Another interesting thing I wanted to point out is notice how Savarkar, as a Hindu nationalist, collaborated with the Muslim separatists. So like the Muslim separatist organizations, they were like upper class Muslims, and they called for their own Muslim state, but they were against like unity with Hindus. So there was some level of like collaboration there, kind of similar to, and this isn't really a direct parallel, but there's some similarity there to like how Zionists in Germany like signed pacts with the Nazi government in order to remove Jewish people from Germany.
Real quick, when we mentioned the Naxalites and the rebels in India, it reminded me that there's a documentary that I watched about them a couple times called Red Ant Dream that came out in 2013 or 2014, which is worth a watch. It's been a while since I've watched it. I certainly watched it well before I joined the party, and I guess it's mostly putting them in a favorable light, but honestly, I can't remember because it's been a while since I've watched it. So if anybody's more interested in the rebel Maoists in India, that is a very good documentary to watch.
Okay, thank you. We will now go to our wrap-up slides and announcements. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Please visit our partner publishing house, New Outlook Publishers. You can find a lot of great works there and build your own Marxist-Leninist library. And of course, purchasing books from New Outlook Publishers helps you support the school. Our latest release came out today on the 1936 Soviet Constitution by Comrade J.B. Stalin. Please check that out. And once again, purchasing books from New Outlook Publishers helps support the school. Thank you.
And we will go to our outro of the Internationale.
condescending saviors to rule us from a judgment